I'm Dr. Marcello Sbrocca. In this video, I'm going to talk about plastic or synthetic reeds versus traditional or cane reeds. So I'm going to kind of go over the pros of one while discussing the cons of the other, and then I'll do the opposite, and then I'll kind of give a conclusion. So let's start with the pros of plastic or synthetic reeds. Well, if I had to describe plastic reeds in one word, it would be, stability or consistency or something like that. Because, they don't dry out, they last a long time, and even though they do wear out, they're very consistent in how they play. They're really amazing in how, I will say, they do work a little better if you at least lick the back side of them before you put them on your mouthpiece. But even if you don't do that, they can be bone dry, or you could have played them for an hour and they're going to play the same. You could be at a high altitude and then go to a low altitude where it's really humid, and they'll play the same. You could sit there in a rehearsal and not play for 20 minutes, and then not play a single note, and then jump right into playing, and they will play well. And they'll play how they do in the rehearsal as they will when you go and perform. So they're consistent, and nothing really affects them other than maybe if you were to expose them to heat or something that might damage them, but otherwise, other than wearing out very slowly, they're always the same. It's almost like, you're all of a sudden the saxophone becomes like a brass instrument or a flute, in the sense that every time you pick it up, it's basically the same, which is what makes plastic reeds so amazing, in my opinion. And that makes them, I just said a lot there. It's like plastic reeds, they don't dry out. They're always the same. I don't have to deal with, a reed kind of dying, or, cane reeds. It's like their lifespan is, of course, much shorter, and they have a real kind of arc to their life. You have to break them in, which some people might argue you have to break plastic reeds in a little bit, but not to the extent that you need to with a cane reed. It's like you break them in, they have to kind of stabilize, you have to get to know them, and then, you want to play them, but you don't want to play them too much, because if you play them too much, you'll wear them out. If you play them too much too early, you'll wear them out prematurely. Whereas plastic reeds, it's basically like you get them, and you play it a little bit to get to know it, and then that's it. And especially like if you're a hobbyist, or somebody who only plays an hour or a couple hours a week, or even just like an hour a day, you could have one plastic reed, and it could last you as much as a couple of years. Some people argue that plastic reeds should be switched out every year or something like that. I think that's okay. It gets a little expensive, depending on how many you have. If you're somebody who's playing plastic reeds full time and you play them, several hours a day, I would say you should have at least 2 or 3 plastic reeds, and you should rotate through them, because they do wear out. Really, I don't think you need to buy. Some people, they'll have 5 plastic reeds, and they'll rotate through them, and they will just get a whole new set of them every year. I think that sounds pretty expensive and a little unnecessary. I think you need to have, if you're somebody who's performing or something like that, I'd say you need to have 1 or 2 plastic reeds that are less than a year old. And then but the older ones, it's not like a cane reed where they really fall off at one point. They start to die, for sure, but it's not as drastic, and you can still practice on them, and so they last a long time. Okay, so they last a long time. They're very consistent. It's nice to have a plastic reed as backup. If your cane reeds chip or break, or let's say you're going to a different altitude, there's two main reasons why a plastic reed is kind of nice if you're traveling. Number one, if your cane reeds, either they get ruined somehow, like they warp or they crap out or you lose them or something. If you just have a spare plastic reed in your case at all times, you can always have that. It's going to play the same here as it does there, and it's just a nice backup to have. Another reason that I like plastic reeds, even as someone who doesn't play them all the time, is since they don't change, I can always put a plastic reed on my mouthpiece when I feel like something is wrong. And it can help me determine if what's wrong is in fact the reed, or if it's another part of the saxophone, or if it's just simply me. I'm from Colorado. It's a high altitude. I did my undergraduate here, and I always found people to complain a lot about the altitude and the dryness, the climate, and how it affected their reeds. And as much as I think that there's some truth to that, I do think that sometimes people exaggerate it a little bit. Sometimes when you just play in a different room, things just feel different, and you can say, oh, it's my reed or something, but in reality it's just a different room. And so that's kind of when, or maybe you're nervous or whatever, or you're tired. That can be when plastic reeds are nice. Because they're always the same. They don't warp unless unless I suppose you expose them to like heat, like boiling water or the sun or something. They're not going to warp, and so they remain consistent. And so you can tell like, that's me, or yeah, my reeds really did crap out or something like that. Okay, so you have, and then they're also durable. Plastic reeds, you can certainly damage them. You could slap tongue on them really hard that it kind of makes the center of them start to lighten in color, almost like they're going to crack or something. And you could play them too hard, too long, wear them out early on, and I'm sure you could damage the tip. But when simply comparing them to cane reeds, they last a long time and they're very durable. That's the point. Not that they last a long time. I already spoke about that. It's that they're more durable. They're not going to chip. They're not going to break nearly as easily as a cane reed. Okay. Now let's go on to the pros of cane reeds. Oh, one other thing, and this is kind of pros and cons of cane reeds. Plastic reeds, just for information, they tend to be a little thinner and narrower than a lot of cane reeds that I'm used to. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is something to look out for. You might have to tighten your ligature down a lot. It might mess with the fit of your ligature. You may need to get a different ligature to make your plastic reed fit better to your mouthpiece, but they do tend to be thinner and narrower, for what it's worth. So, pros of cane reeds. Well, number one, you have the most amount of variety with a cane reed. You have cane reeds that are super hard, super soft. You have a very wide variety of brands, and many of those brands offer a very wide variety of cuts of reeds. Plastic reeds are starting to up their game with that nowadays, but it'll still never match the variety that there is of cane reeds. So there's that. And this is rather subjective compared to the other points I'm making, but I much prefer the feel of cane reeds against my lip than I do plastic reeds. That's not to say the texture is better or worse, it's more the give of a plastic or of a cane reed. Something about it I just prefer. I don't know if they bend easier or what, but they have a different feel to them, and for what it's worth, I really prefer the feeling of a cane reed. The last reason why, the last major pro of a cane reed is, and this goes along with the variety, but there's also just the customization of a cane reed. I can clip a cane reed, I can shave a cane reed, though typically when I find a good cane reed, I don't want to do any of that stuff to it. What makes it good is I don't have to touch it and it plays very well. But there's just a much higher level of customization. There's more variety and there's things that you can do to the reed. I've never tried clipping a plastic reed, and I don't think I would try it. I'm not really interested in doing that, and I don't really see a point in shaving them down. Maybe somebody has. I haven't. But I know for sure you can do it with cane reeds, and I don't feel confident doing that to a plastic reed. Also, it's been a while since I bought a new plastic reed, but for a while it was like there's only so many plastic reeds out there, and maybe, plastic reeds were not so great for certain saxophones. I had a plastic reed on soprano, and I just didn't really like it that much. It wasn't bad, but I just preferred, when I did use a plastic reed, I tended to like it more on alto. I think it's kind of the bigger reed, maybe the better, I don't know. But at the time when I was playing a bunch of plastic reeds, I didn't like the selection of plastic reeds for all the different saxophones. But that's very subjective. Okay, the last main pro to cane reeds is, and this goes on top of the idea of customization, is the sound. Cane reed or plastic reeds can sound very good. There's a reason that there are high-level professionals who just play plastic reeds. They sound pretty good nowadays, but I still don't think they sound better than cane reeds. Cane reeds, I don't know what it is, but there's two cons to the sound of a plastic reed. Number one is they sound great in a practice room, but when you go on stage, they just lack something, which maybe some people were expecting me to say that, but they do. It's like they don't have enough overtones or upper harmonics or something. The sound isn't rich or thick enough. There's not enough color. There are some high-level classical saxophonists out there who say that if you just push them hard enough or whatever, they sound great and whatnot. And I think that they sound good, but they don't sound great. What sounds great is a good cane reed. That's what sounds great. A good cane reed just has more color to it, a thicker sound to it. Sure, it might be a little rough around the edges sometimes, there might be a little air to it, it might be a little harsh in a practice room, but when you go on stage and you have things just right and it's a good reed, they sound better. They just sound better. That's my opinion. That being said, okay, now let's get into kind of more of a discussion between the two. That was the pros and cons, but now I'm going to talk about how I personally use them, because I do in fact use both. I like to use plastic reeds when I teach less experienced players. And I do that because the reed doesn't dry out while I talk, and when I'm teaching less experienced players, the sound, it doesn't need to be like a 9 or a 10 out of 10 or something like that. It just needs to be good. And plastic reeds, they make a good sound, especially if you're just playing in a room. And they're always the same, and I can just leave one or two in my case, which I like to, I think it's good to have, well, I'll get into that. They're nice to have on hand for emergencies anyway, but it's like I just leave it in my case. I don't have to worry about it. It always plays the same. I know I can show everything I need to a less experienced player, and it's going to work perfect, if not better than a cane reed, because it's always going to be the same. But the caveat is, if you're going to perform on one reed or the other, you have to primarily play one reed or the other. You can't practice on on plastic reeds and then perform on cane reeds. At least in my experience, you can't do that. They're different enough. So you have to commit to one. You know, I play my plastic reeds either in an emergency or when I teach less experienced players, but otherwise, you just have to play the cane reeds. You got to deal with them not being so good sometimes. You got to deal with breaking them in. You got to deal with them wearing out and warping and all that stuff. And if you don't, then they're not going to be the magical reeds that they can be. You know, so that's important to mention. You have to commit to one. One quick thing that I forgot to mention in my video, but am now remembering as I am editing the video, is that there is a way that you can treat your cane reeds that makes them nearly as consistent as plastic reeds. I go over this in my saxophone equipment video if you want to hear a better description of it. But basically, in a box of reeds, you know, for example, if you buy a box of Vandoren reeds, you know, they're all different. They're all slightly different strengths and densities and whatnot. But if you play all of them basically every day for a small amount of time, after about 2 weeks, you can kind of decide which are the good reeds and which are the bad reeds. You'll find that 1 or 2 reeds are really good. A couple more reeds will be decent, and the rest will basically be garbage, unfortunately. That being said, the 1 or 2 reeds that are really good tend to be really long-lasting reeds. They'll last at least a couple months, and I find that even though you, of course, still have to wet them, they will be nearly as consistent as plastic reeds. The key here is just that you break them in carefully. Anyway, I will put my saxophone equipment video down in the description, and you can cut to the section that talks about reeds if you would like to hear a better description of how I make my cane reeds almost as good as plastic reeds. Thank you. Another thing that I don't like about plastic reeds is, this is just my recommendation, they're not good for beginners. I think they can teach you bad habits. I think you'll learn more from a cane reed than a plastic reed when you're a beginner. So I don't think beginners should play them. I don't think they have enough physical give to them, and I just don't think that they teach you very well. That being said, and this is an interesting exception, or a very particular exception, once you get to a relatively high level, I think it's worth it for everybody to play plastic reeds exclusively for, half a year or something. Why? Well, they don't change. And so every time I pick my saxophone up, it's not something I have to think about. I don't have to worry about it drying out. I don't have to worry about it being different from the practice session to the rehearsal to the performance. And so it allows me to be concerned with everything else. When we play music, it's like we have the music and we have the saxophone. And each of those things are very complicated. If we're just looking at the saxophone, there's so many variables. Reeds themselves can vary so much. The weather can affect them. The altitude can affect them. They have not only do they have the shorter lifespan compared to a plastic reed, but they have that, as I was saying, that they have a total arc to their life. You got to break them in. Then they wear out at one point. Whereas when you play a plastic reed, it's always the same. And so it allows you to really realize when something is you and when something is the equipment. And so that's why I think it's good for a period of time to just play plastic reeds. You'll learn a lot. You won't be so bogged down by the pain in the ass qualities of a cane reed. I also think it's good to get well acquainted with plastic reeds because you get to know them, and you can, as I was saying, you can just hold on to one and throw it in your case and have it as a backup. You know, a cane reed that's really warped is going to play worse than a plastic reed. Um, and so if you got one of those on hand and you've played them before, you can't beat them. It's just they play as good as a good cane reed, not a great cane reed, but a good one. And that's a real pro. But why is it that I make such a big deal about the sound of a cane reed? Well, to me, oh yeah, the other thing I was talking about that they have a thicker, more beautiful sound. The other thing about plastic reeds, and this is to me the biggest deal breaker about them and why I don't play them full time, is they lack a certain focus. Um, it almost makes me feel like I'm playing with a jazz embouchure all of a sudden. Something a little looser. It just kind of has a slight sag to it. And I always hear it and I can't get over it. And that's the main reason really I play cane reeds. So that's just my opinion. It's a pretty fine detail. You know, it's a pretty it's a pretty small. I don't know if I call it small reason. I mean, sound is just so important. But if you're somebody who doesn't care that much, maybe you're not a professional. Plastic reeds may be the way to go. They're just so much easier to deal with. They're of course, they're more expensive than a cane reed, but you only have to buy like two, and they could last you like a couple of years sometimes. I still like to use a plastic reed. I loved them when I had to be in band, or if you play an orchestra or something, and you don't have to play that loud. You can't beat them, because they don't dry out. So that is another exception of when I use them. But at the end of the day, if I had to pick between one or the other, I'd still have to pick cane reeds because the plastic reeds are still not quite there. I'd love to play the new Vandoren ones. I haven't played those yet, but I've played the Légère ones, and I'm basing a lot of my opinions off of Vandoren cane reeds and Légère plastic reeds. Anyway, that about does it for this video. If you have any comments or questions, or if you have had some more positive experience with some other kinds of plastic reeds other than Légère reeds, I'd love to hear about it. And thank you so much for watching.